Greetings, viewers. EricTheCarGuy here, back again with another live show where I answer your questions. I need to push a button here. Sorry about that. Where I answer your questions that are posted to my Google Plus page. So thank you for watching, for starters. I just need to go over a few things real quick here. Questions will be taken from the Google Plus event. So if you want your question answered, please post it to the Google Plus event during the show or sometime before the show. Which is kind of late now, but as far as the comments that are posted to YouTube, I can't see those comments, so I won't be answering those questions, and I also won't be answering any questions posted to the YouTube video after the event takes place. Sorry about that, but there's just a lot of questions out there from a lot of you. However, there is always EricTheCarGuy.com, so if you have automotive questions, there's a welcome video there to tell you about all of our features that we have to help you with your automotive questions, should you have them. It's available 24/7, 365. So if you have questions that I'm not able to get to during this show, I would ask that you go there, and we will get to them. There will also be links in the description to many of the things that are discussed in this video. So if you have a question about something you've seen in the video, check the description first. There may be something there that can answer your question. Let's see. Well, all right. Well, let's just jump in. There's plenty of questions to get to today, and I try to answer as many questions as I can during these half-hour shows, so we're just going to jump right in. We've got Alistair Haddon. Let me just check something real quick. I have to make sure my broadcast is still going because sometimes it goes away unexpectedly. Alistair Haddon asked, Eric, what is your preference with ceramic or semi-metallic brake pads? I tend to use ceramic because they are quieter and have less dust. However, I do not understand why European manufacturers prefer to use semi-metallic. What do you think of this? Well, I also prefer ceramic brake pads, if I'm honest. However, semi-metallic works just fine. In fact, semi-metallic was used for years before ceramics came along. I think it was the aircraft industry where they started using ceramics. Cool thing about ceramics is they're quiet and they have really good heat dissipation and all those wonderful things with them. But once again, semi-metallics work just fine. But I don't know the specifics on it, but certainly the compounds that the friction material are made of have a definite effect on the performance of those pads and how quiet they are and that type of thing. And they spent a great deal of time trying to figure out the perfect mix, if you will, to put in there. As far as why European car manufacturers are using them, I can tell you anytime a manufacturer does anything, it pretty much boils down to cost. Engineering is a part of it, but they're making many, many vehicles and putting them out there, and any pennies that they can save, any place that they can, they do precisely that, as long as it holds up to their performance standards that they set for that vehicle before they put it out the door. So it may frustrate you that they do it that way, however, they have their reasons. And from what I know, most of the reasons that manufacturers do anything boil down to cost. All right, Matthew McHale. Eric, thanks for answering my question about the parking brake on a 99 Civic Si. It passed safely, flawlessly. Awesome. Now he's talking about a 1997 Subaru Legacy wagon manual has a very sloppy gear stick, meaning that there's a lot of play with the shifter when it is in gear. However, it does not have any effect on drivability from what I understand. This is a case I've tried worn out bushings. From what I understand, this is a case of tired or worn out bushings in the shifter. Could you confirm this? Would replacing the bushings with new OEM poly bushings eliminate the play? Thanks in advance. It does sound like, based on your description, that the bushings would be a really good place to start. So, no, I'm not answering the door. A really good place to start to address that issue. And you're correct. I mean, something like a 97, that's a fairly old vehicle. It's been around for a while. It wouldn't be beyond reason that those bushings would be worn out. A way to confirm this is to actually get down there and take a look at the shift linkage and take a look at those bushings. If you see them and they're dry rotted, cracked, or perhaps worn as you suspect, then by all means. But if it were me and I were looking at this vehicle, I would also look at this very same thing. So that's the direction I would go with that. Larry Brown asked, would it be hard to put a V8 Vortec in my 1993 Chevy Blazer? I have a V6 Vortec in it right now. Yes. Particularly with modern vehicles, Swapping engines, particularly like that, I mean, if you're putting the same thing in that you're taking out, no big deal. But if you're putting something new in place of what's originally there, it's a lot more difficult and a lot more complicated than it used to be. It used to be that you could swap engines out, and there were different engine packages available for vehicles. They would come with, like, say, a 6-cylinder model and an 8-cylinder model and all those types of things, similar to what you have here. But today, the way the transmissions are set up, the way the emissions are set up, and the electronics are set up, I mean, anytime you go and do a swap like that, all that stuff has to come with it. So it's not just swapping the engine. It's swapping the harness, it's swapping the ECU, it's making sure the transmission can work with that, so you're probably going to have to swap the transmission, and then that's going to have to run correctly. So you've got a whole host of things that open up Pandora's box whenever you try to do something like that. Is it possible to do that? Absolutely, it's possible. Now, is it possible for somebody who's not necessarily experienced with that type of thing? I'm going to say no. Well, okay, I'll say it's possible, but I think you may be in over your head on that, and I would definitely reconsider that option. If I would replace what comes in a modern vehicle. Older vehicles, like, say, back in the late 70s, yeah, late 70s, early 80s, there's a lot of things you can do back there, but once you start hitting the mid 90s and things with OBD2 and stuff, not saying, it was a lot easier then. But still, there are those things that you need to deal with, such as all the electronics to run those systems that you're swapping over. So a little more involved than just throwing things together. Joseph Riviera asks, he has a 1996 Acura Integra automatic. I'm currently working on a crankshaft replacement. I need some advice, tips for this project. So I would have to redo the job. So I won't have to redo the job anytime soon. I just want to do it right the first time. I just got the cylinder head done at a local machine shop, valve job, etc., resurfaced. That's all taken care of. The job block rebuild info. The replacement crankshaft is used, but in great condition. Questions regarding crankshaft are listed below. Do I need to get the crankshaft resurfaced or cleaned? If so, what standard size rod, main bearing cap, still clear? Or would I need a different size? I'm just going to read all your questions. Hones, would it be wise to hone the glaze off the cylinder walls? If so, would standard size rings still fit? Last, what's your take on getting the block out of the car? Is it possible to remove it without taking the transmission out? Rather would use a hoist, but need a plan B. Too hot in Bakersfield, California, to go without a car. All right. Listen, man, it's great that you're reaching out and asking these questions, but it sounds like you're rebuilding this engine. And my first question is why? Any time with an engine rebuild like this, it requires careful measuring and careful assembly, and often special tools to do both. A good set of torque wrenches, also a decent set of measuring tools. As far as your crankshaft, I don't know. I haven't seen your crankshaft. You say it's in good condition, but I don't know. And as far as standard rod size, I don't know. And the way it works with Honda bearings is a little bit trickier than most people think. I get asked about Honda rebuilds like this all the time, and everybody's like, hey, I just want to slap a set of bearings in my Honda and be done. This is not the way it works. The way it works is you have to measure the inside diameter of the connecting rod. Then you have to measure the journal on the crankshaft. And then you subtract the difference between the two. Then you figure out what the clearance is supposed to be when the bearing is in place. You subtract that from that number that you got when you subtracted the outside diameter from the crankshaft journal, and you have the size bearing you need. And that's the way you need to go to figure out the bearings that you have there. Now, Honda bearings are fun. They don't list them necessarily by that size. They're color-coded. So there's a color coding for a particular clearance that you're looking for. So in order to rebuild a Honda engine, especially one where you're swapping out a crankshaft like that, you're going to have to measure each and every single thing to make sure that your clearances are correct. If the clearances are not correct, your oil pressure won't be good. Your oil pressure is created by the clearances in the bottom end. So if that's not correct, you won't have proper oil pressure. Or worse yet, Honda engines like to spin fast. So if your clearances aren't correct, if your torque's not correct, if things aren't right, you could very well make the thing scatter as a result of improper assembly. Uh, there's many things that go into building an engine. It's not just slapping parts together, which is kind of what I'm reading from your questions here. It's a bit more involved than that, and I would say get your machine shop involved with all these questions, because I know they have the measuring equipment. That's what they do. They machine things. So definitely get them involved. Now, getting the block out of the vehicle. I did a video about the removal of an engine from a Civic. An Integra and a Civic are basically the same chassis, if not the same chassis. So you might want to watch that video as far as getting that out. I took the engine and transmission out as a unit. I was replacing the engine. To me, it was easier to take both out at the same time. In addition, you're going to have to disconnect the crankshaft from the transmission anyway. So personally, I prefer to take them both out at the same time. My preference, if I have a vehicle lift, is drop the engine and transmission out the bottom. That's my preference. However, you can just as easily, just saw that video I just mentioned, pull it out from the top. And then you can take all your bits off that way and do all your engine work and that type of thing. But I actually read this question earlier, and I got this little book out for you. Grab yourself a book like this, read through it, find out about the theory, find out about how doing this type of work is supposed to work. Do some research. I know you're asking me this question now, and that's great, but it sounds like you already have some stuff apart. And the thing to do is know what you're getting into beforehand, because it's real easy, particularly with this type of engine work, to get in over your head. It's real easy to think you're doing something right and be doing it completely wrong. I mean, it does take some experience, like I said, some measuring tools and proper torquing tools, torque wrenches, stuff like that you've got to know. And the service manual is going to tell you all that information. But once again, you're going to have to measure all those clearances in order to figure out what size bearings to put on, the mains, and the connecting rods and all that stuff as well. So it's not an easy just throw some parts in this thing and it'll be better. Honing, same kind of thing. Machine shop is going to have to decide whether the cylinders are of the correct size to where they're going to be able to accept the pistons and what size pistons they're going to be able to accept. If the pistons are egg-shaped as a result of wear or something like that, they'll be able to find that out. As far as honing, that's done to help seat in the rings to start out with, and also help with oil coatings inside there. That's always something you want to do whenever you're doing rings. As far as what size rings to use, once again, you're going to have to sit down and figure out the ring gaps on the pistons. And this is involved stuff. So just make friends with that machine shop that worked on your cylinder head and bring them the block, pose these questions to them, give them the parts that you have, and tell them what you're aiming to do. And they should be able to help you much better than I can through something like this. But I do wish you good luck with that. And like I say, that type of reading, that kind of stuff, that's the way to go. Find some reputable authors and some books out there if you're looking to build Honda engines, or any engines for that matter. I've got a whole stack of them around here that I've read through over the years just for light reading. Oh, let's see. All right, Ryan Ryan Dickey, sorry. Eyes are getting old. It's hard to see this. Eric, I'm starting out in automotive DIY. My question is, how can I make sure I dispose of any fluids or waste that ends up on rags, towels properly? Will my local auto parts store help me out with this? Thanks. Love your videos. Excellent question, Ryan. Excellent question. And I'm going to admit that I'm kind of partially guilty of not disposing of those rags properly. Mainly, I'm not disposing of rags. I haven't disposed of rags in a really long time. In fact, I got 2 boxes full of them. And there's the thing. I've got 2 boxes full of them. Rags, when they are contaminated with oils and fuels and whatever else rags get contaminated with when you use them like that, are a fire hazard. And the best place to store rags, or really the only place to store rags, is in a fireproof container. Throwing them on the floor, that type of thing, can invite disaster. And in shops where they come in and inspect the shops, they don't want to see a bunch of rags laying out. You have to have an approved container to keep your used rags in for situations just like this. As far as they're disposable, all the jobs that I had, it was really nice. Once you threw them in that safe bin or whatever, they would come and collect them on a weekly basis and bring us new ones. I haven't subscribed to one of those services in a very long time. I've just been buying new rags and filling up boxes with them. Well, this is something I'm going to have to deal with soon. Auto parts store is probably a good place to start with this. I would ask them and see if they know of or in connection with something like this, because there's got to be some solution out there. The question you posed puts a question in my mind about handling my own materials, as I just mentioned. So I don't, let's put it this way, I don't exactly have an answer for you now, but now that I've heard your question, I really want to go out and find out what that answer is and share it with everybody. So look for that in a future video or something like that. DA Coder, should I buy an automatic car then swap a manual into it? Personally, no. I don't think you should. Same thing with the engine swap if you want to go from a V6 to a V8. Same thing. You're dealing with electronics that are designed to work together. You swap out the transmission, the electronics all need to be changed and everything else, so it's not, you know, some holes need to be cut in the floor, clutch pedals need to be added. Why bother going through all that? Start with a manual transmission vehicle. I mean, really, if you want to modify a vehicle, I'd say the best way to modify it is to start with something that you can work with. Don't get something that you're going to have to do a bunch of work to in order to get it somewhere. And that often happens because this is the car I have, and I want to make it wonderful. And I understand that feeling, trust me. I mean, the car that I fell in love with back in the day, a 72 Galaxy 500, not exactly the car you make go fast. Good for cruising down the road and that kind of thing, but man, it's 4,000 pounds of just metal. And as far as if you want to go fast, you want something light with a lot of power. Just to make something big like that go fast, you need lots and lots of power, so it's not nearly as efficient as finding something that's lighter. Not that they didn't do that. I mean, those NASCARs back in the day were big, heavy sleds as they were, but, you know, and they cut the heck out of the frames and everything to try to save as much weight as possible and just barely make the structure usable to get those things around the track. But yeah, as far as that type of thing, yeah, I don't recommend it. But I will say this, with enough money and time, you can do anything you want. So if you got money, you got time, go for it. All right, next, Jay Karafik. You're on like every single show. What are your thoughts on 3/16" compression fittings on brake lines to replace rotted sections? Is it okay for a quick fix? Excellent question, and that's, you know, even though you show up every show, you still ask some really good questions. Okay, have I done it? Yes. Have I been successful with it? Yes. Have I done it as a professional mechanic? No. On my own cars years ago, I did it. It didn't leak, worked fine. Recently, I replaced an entire brake line on my Ford because it had a compression fitting in it because I was worried it wouldn't pass tech at the track. Now, like I said, it can work. I've seen it work. If you have inspections wherever you are, the safety inspection where they're going to look at it, I used to have a Pennsylvania safety inspection license, and if I saw a compression fitting, automatic fail. So we were replacing that brake line, a complete brake line, not using compression fittings. So that should tell you something. In many places, the law states you can't use them. And I don't think that in a professional shop type setting that they would be doing something like that, although I don't know. So they may not advocate it either. They may say, hey, replace the brake line. That being said, you know, when they install brake lines on a vehicle, there's like no body on the car or vehicle, anything. It's real easy for them just to drop those brake lines in there. After the fact, after the whole thing's assembled, some of those brake lines, oh man, you have to take half the vehicle apart just to get to stuff, like maybe sometimes even dropping gas tanks. I know on mini Hondas, they run them inside the vehicle. It can be a real nightmare. I understand. I feel your pain. I understand why you'd want to just throw a compression fitting on there and be done with it. Can you do it? Sure. Will it last? Don't know. Is it legal where you're at? Probably not. So, you know, you take that answer and do whatever you like with it. Yes, you can do it, but should you? Probably not. Let's see. Moving on. And just as an FYI here, I'm answering repair questions. I'm not answering questions so much outside of repair. I try to stick to repair questions to keep it like that. So if I'm skipping your question, most likely it's because it's not necessarily repair related. Yeah, moving. Let's see. Are we still there? All right. Duraj Elabal? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, and I do butcher your names on this show, and I apologize for that. It's just, you know, I can fix the heck out of cars, but when it comes to reading names sometimes or just reading in general, not my best subject. Let's just put it that way. Anyway, Duraj has a 1997 Honda CR-V automatic rough start when engine is cold. Have to press and hold the gas until engine warms. Once warm, can restart no problem. If the car sits for a long time, there are problems starting again. Smell of gas when starting. Have replaced gas filter, cap, and rotor, plugs and wires, did injector cleaning, valve adjustment done, no DTC codes, and no CEL help. CEL stands for check engine light. You covered the basics. I'm going to say you've done well. You've done well for starters in addressing this problem, particularly with no codes. If you had a code, that's what I would suggest you pursue first. This situation in particular, I'm thinking I would take a look at the coolant temperature sensor. Coolant temperature sensor is on the engine. The computer looks at it to determine engine temperature. Go figure. Well, it uses this to calculate a fuel mixture. So when your engine is cold, it knows the engine is cold. It adds a bit more fuel because it knows that the engine doesn't want to run as much without a richer mixture when it's cold, let's say. As it warms up, it leans that mixture out. It also hands everything over to the O2 sensor for it to help manage fuel delivery, to help keep it within that stoichiometric ratio, which is like the sweet spot where they like to keep an engine running for optimum emissions and power, let's say. It's a short explanation. So if the coolant temperature sensor is, like, say, a bit lazy or not necessarily giving the correct readings, the computer is given false information. Therefore, it calculates a fuel mixture based on false information. So you might have a problem like you described, where when it's cold, it doesn't run so good, but when it warms up, it's better. So the way I would handle this, and it's a 97 luckily, this means that you can plug a scan tool into it, and if you have a scan tool capable of reading live data, this is what I would do. I would take a look at the coolant temperature reading when the engine is stone cold. You haven't started it, nothing. Just turn the key on, don't start the engine, take a look at the reading on the scan tool. It should be ambient temperature. It should be whatever it is outside. So if it's 70 degrees outside, coolant temperature should be darn close to that. If it says something like it's reading 100 degrees, that should be like a red flag. Another way to do this, to check coolant temperature sensors that don't necessarily set check engine lights, is to, if you have an intake air temperature sensor, which I believe that vehicle does, it's usually listed as IAT, you can compare the two. So your intake air temperature sensor and your coolant temperature sensor on a scan tool, live data, should read the same on a stone cold engine. So you look, they'll read differently as the engine warms up because the air is going to be cooler than the coolant. But initially, you can do that quick check just to see if those readings are the same or really close to one another. They may not read exactly the same, but they may be slightly off. That being the case, then I would recommend replacing that coolant temperature sensor. When you do, there's going to be some coolant loss. If there's a lot of coolant loss, I would definitely recommend bleeding the air out of the cooling system. And that's something you might want to check for just right off the bat. So if you've done any cooling system work recently, that can affect coolant temperature sensor readings because if an air pocket gets in there, once again, computer is getting false readings. So it's still getting readings, and they're not out of range according to its specifications, so it just goes with what it's being told. However, that information may be wrong, and if it is, it won't be able to calculate a correct fuel mixture. So I would start with that. That's how I would pursue that one. Let's move on here. Real quick, I'll answer this one, even though it's not repair related. Brad Terralt. Eric, I saw on Facebook that you were with Scotty Kilmer, another YouTube mechanic. Do you think you will ever do a video together? I did meet Scotty a few weeks ago, and he's a great guy. Really enjoyed meeting him, really enjoyed hanging out with him. Shell flew us down to Houston for an event. Scotty just happens to live in Houston. So he was also in attendance there, and really enjoyed getting to know him. Awesome guy, and a newfound respect for him as well. That being said, I actually asked him this question, and honestly, he wasn't into it. Not because of me, but mostly because he likes to do things on his own. He's got his own style, he's got his own thing, so the likelihood of that happening, probably not so much. But I did ask. Moving on. Oh, here's a quick one I can answer also. Rav Singh Sign. Hey Eric, do you recommend Motorfiend HID lights? Are they made of high quality? I have Motorfiend HID lights in 2 of my vehicles. Actually, I've got 2 sets, one of my fog lights and my headlights on my Element are both those lights. They've worked fine. I've had them in there now over a year in both vehicles, 0 issues. So that should tell you something there. All right, Matthew Stevens. Hey, Eric, I have a 1972 Dodge Polara. Cool, 360 Torque Flight 727 with a Holly 2-barrel carb. Love it. The problem is that just off idle, the carb often stumbles and dies, especially in reverse. The warmer it is during the day, the less it happens. Or if I just stomp on it. Not fun in a parking lot. I do have a vacuum gauge, and it pulls a steady 16 inches of vacuum at idle. Do I need to up the base idle a bit? I want to skip rebuilding the carb. I move soon and can't afford the downtime if I make mistakes on my first carb rebuild and get it wrong. Matthew, you're in luck because I shot and edited a carburetor rebuild video on the Fairmont, and that will air not this week, but starting next week. It's actually ended up being a 2-part video, and it goes through the basics of carburetor rebuilding. In your case, I would suspect a problem with the accelerator pump. They're a little diaphragm, and sometimes that diaphragm gets a little tear or hole in it, so when you first step on the gas, it doesn't squirt enough gas down into the engine, and as a result, you get that stumble off idle. Another thing it could possibly be is maybe your choke isn't correctly positioned. Earlier I talked about the coolant temperature sensor. Excuse me, the coolant temperature sensor and the choke are virtually the same thing. So on a carbureted engine, in fact, I even thought about doing a video about this, and I probably should. And the comparison between what the choke plate does and what the coolant temperature sensor does. Choke plate is there to make the engine richer when it's cold. So it's closed when you first start. But as the engine warms up, that thing opens up, and there is no restriction going into the carburetor or the engine. So whenever you have issues like this, sometimes the mixture can be upset by the choke plate being in the incorrect position. So you have to set the choke properly. But based on your description, I'm guessing here that you would have an accelerator pump problem. But fear not, because those Holly 2-barrel carburetors really are not that difficult to rebuild. There's not a whole lot there. Cleaning it up and everything, yeah, it is kind of time consuming. Wait till after you move. And also, you're going to have to go through 2 weeks, well, unless you're a premium member of my website, to see the entire video. It was an hour long, and I tried to make it as short as I could, but trust me, I cut it down quite a bit. So with something like that, stumbling off idle on a carbureted engine, or just stumbling when you first step on the gas, first place I look is the accelerator pump. And you can actually check this. Cool thing about carbureted cars is even when it's off, you can take the air cleaner off, open the choke plate, and look down inside, move the throttle. And you should see in both barrels, it should be squirting gas down in, and it should come out at a pretty good stream. If it just kind of trickles out or doesn't come out too well, you found the problem. All right, John Vickery, retorque head question. Recently replaced the head of my 1991 Mazda 626, 396,000 miles. Way to go, dude. And yes, the lower end is still stock. The question, is it necessary to retorque the head? I used Victor Ryan's gasket set. If so, what is the correct method? And looking forward to Saturday. Hey, if you're making it out to the meetup, awesome. And my meetup is this Saturday, so I'm glad you brought that up because I almost forgot to mention it. But anyway, we'll talk about that more here in a couple minutes. Anyway, yeah, anytime you install a cylinder head on an engine block, the bolts need to be torqued. That's just how it is. Torque is a twisting force. Now, in the case of engine assembly, that torque equates to a clamping force between the parts that are being torqued. And that clamping force is prescribed. In other words, the engineer sat down and said, okay, there's this much stretch to the bolt, there's this much deformation of the metals between the cylinder head and the gasket and the engine block, and they spent a lot of time doing this, guys, pocket protectors, all that kind of thing. I think you know what I mean. It's stereotype, yes, but I think you get where I'm coming from here. But yeah, they come up with those numbers specifically. Now, I actually did a video on torquing cylinder head bolts. I will post a link to that down in the description. But normally there's a certain pattern and sometimes a specific procedure. In order to find out what that is, the service manual is where you got to go. You may be able to find that information online, however. We live in this wonderful digital age where you may not necessarily have to track down the old service manual. You may be able to find that information online somewhere. You may be able to find the service manual online somewhere, and that could help you to get that thing going for maybe another 400,000 miles. Seriously, dude, way to go. So yes, you do have to torque things up again. Let's see where we are as far as time. We are virtually out of time. Trying to check these. These are recent ones that came in that I didn't have a chance to look over. All right. We'll do this one real quick. We got Kangaletta1234. Chungaletta 1234. Sorry. Eric, my 1998 Chevy S10 is running poorly and fuel consumption increased during the last week. I suspect faulty ignition coils. How can I test a faulty ignition coil? Well, I will say this, and this is the reason why I jumped on your question. My opinion, and I've actually talked to people that engineer ignition coils for a living about this, doing resistance checks on ignition coils is virtually useless. and some people may disagree with me on this, but I have tested many a coil that tested good that was actually bad. Coils fail under load, and these engineers that I talked to told me about this. Basically what it is you've got a bunch of really thin wire windings inside of an ignition coil to make it work. I'm not going to get into all that now, but say there's a break in one of those little thin windings. Well, you go and you do an ohm test on it, and it will go through those windings, and even if there's a tiniest break, it may check out within spec as far as the resistance. However, that tiny break under load with the coil breaks down. So resistance checks on coils, I say don't waste your time. Basically what I do is I get a spark tester, and even on those individual coils, you can take a spark tester, stick it in the end of it, and crank the engine and look for spark. That's the quickest way to do it, in my opinion. As far as what your fuel consumption problem is, check out I've got an article on performance issues. I go through basically the list of things to check. Also, I've got one on poor MPG. So I actually have an article based on your problem in your description there. So I would look to that. But you want to check the basics, the tune-up items. Go for the basics first. Tune-up items, that kind of thing, air filters, spark plugs, that type of deal. If you suspect a faulty ignition coil, and let's see, it's a 98 Chevy, so that if it's running, I don't think your coil is faulty because I believe that's a distributor type ignition system, and it doesn't have individual coils. So if it's running, I wouldn't think it would be the coil, but check the wires, check for voltage leaks, spray a little water on stuff, look for sparks. All this stuff is contained in that article. It includes videos and everything, and I'll post links in the description to all of those so you can check those out. So if you have problems and I wasn't able to get to them in this video, or just in general, stop by. All that stuff's at the website, like I mentioned before. Now let's close this one out, and I'm glad it was mentioned earlier. My annual meetup is Saturday, so if you're traveling out to see me on Saturday, I look forward to meeting you on Saturday. I have this annual thing where I invite people out to the shop. It's been posted on my website now for quite a while. If you're coming to RSVP, that kind of thing, that way I know you're coming, and make sure I have enough stuff to grill. But it's going to be an awesome time, a really awesome time. I've done this. This is the third year doing it. It has always been an amazing thing. I really enjoy meeting all of you that make the trip out. You just make what I do frickin' amazing. So thank you for that. Now, let's see. Here's something else. As far as the next show that would normally be on July 30th from now, I do these shows every 2 weeks. I'm not going to be able to make that show, mainly because I'll be traveling out of town to a 3M boot camp. So I'm going to check out the folks at 3M. I'll be doing social networking stuff on that. However, in its place, I'm going to give you a really cool video that I shot with Valvoline, some of the experts there. I sat down with one of their engineers and one of their people that handles a lot of the questions that you have. I sat down with both of them and asked them questions that you posted to my forum, and we talked about oils and lubricants, and we made like a really good video out of it. So that's what you're going to get on the 30th. So the next live show will actually be August 13th. So put that on your calendar. So I'm sorry I'm going to miss that other show, but I think you're really going to like that oil video that's going to be coming out. Also, one more thing, the Traxian seat that I did a tool review on last week, there's a giveaway with that. I'll post a link in the description. So if you have the possibility to win those, J&B Tools is giving away 2 of those. Once again, links in the description. Let's see, blah, blah, blah. Yes, next show, August 13th. Check description for all kinds of links, details. So if you have questions, check that. All that stuff about me not answering questions after the event is over on the event or on the YouTube thing, I apologize for that. But once again, head over to EricTheCarGuy.com, 24/7, 365. There are answers there. There are answers there. If you wish to connect with me socially, I can be found on Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. And I close each of my videos, including these really awesome live events, with be safe, have fun, stay dirty. I'll see you next time.